At what age can you find your why? Most people assume it appears at some magical moment, after a degree, after a job, after some achievement that finally makes life make sense. But the truth is far more uncomfortable and far more empowering. Your why doesn't wait for your age. It waits for your attention. Some discover it at 16, others at 60, but every day you delay the search, life silently chooses for you. Every decision you make without a why pushes you further into a life built on expectations instead of intention. This isn't about finding a purpose someday. It's about deciding whether you're willing to keep living on autopilot today. Your why is already inside you. The question is whether you're brave enough to stop, listen, and claim it before another year slips away. The idea that purpose arrives at a right age is one of the most damaging beliefs men carry because it convinces them that meaning follows a timeline instead of reflection. From a young age, men are taught to measure themselves by milestones. Graduate here, earn this, marry by then, provide always. And somewhere in that checklist, they quietly assume purpose will reveal itself on schedule. But purpose doesn't work like that. It's not chronological, it's psychological. A man can be 18 and clear, or 48 and confused, because purpose responds to awareness, not age. The pressure men feel to figure it out early is often placed on them by a world that expects certainty long before identity is fully formed. Women observing this often see something men don't, the exhaustion behind the performance. They see men forcing clarity, pretending confidence, pushing down questions that feel inconvenient because they don't align with the age they should be. Men, meanwhile, internalize this pressure as failure. They believe they're late, behind, missing something everyone else has already discovered. But no one is late to their own life. The only thing a man can be late to is listening to himself. The belief that purpose should arrive with age also traps men in patterns that look stable on the outside, but hollow on the inside. Many men hold on to careers, relationships, or identities simply because they've invested too many years to admit those years were spent in the wrong direction. Women watching them often sense the silent drift, the quiet dissatisfaction, the dream that surfaces only in rare moments of honesty. They aren't judging him. They're witnessing the internal war between who he is and who he thinks he's supposed to be by this age. And that war only deepens when he believes he has run out of time to change. The moment a man realizes purpose is timeless is often the first moment he actually feels permission to explore who he really is. Men rarely grant themselves that permission without a breaking point. They wait for burnout, a crisis, or a major life disruption to finally admit they're searching. Women, however, tend to reach this realization sooner, not because it's easier for them, but because they're encouraged to reflect rather than prove. Men, taught to solve problems, often treat purpose like another problem to fix instead of a truth to uncover. But purpose isn't solved, it's remembered. The truth is, men discover purpose the moment they stop asking, "Am I old enough?" and start asking, "Am I honest enough?" When age is no longer the measure, they begin to notice patterns that have followed them since childhood. What energized them, what frustrated them, what they defended instinctively. Patterns aren't immature or outdated. They're clues. Women often notice these clues before men do. They point out the moments he lights up, the things he does naturally, the values he protects without thinking. What she sees as obvious, he often dismisses as irrelevant simply because it doesn't align with the image he believes he should have achieved by now. The painful irony is that the only time purpose becomes visible is when a man stops performing for the age he is and starts paying attention to the person he has always been. Most men don't realize they already carry the answers they keep searching for because they've been taught to trust achievement more than intuition. From early on, men learn to validate themselves through results, grades, promotions, performance, capability. And in that constant pursuit, they forget to honor the internal signals that were guiding them long before society started measuring them. The truth is they know more than they admit, but doubt convinces them that clarity must come from experience, age, or external approval instead of the quiet instincts they've had all along. The biggest reason men overlook what they already know is because certainty feels dangerous in a world where vulnerability is often misunderstood as weakness. Many men hesitate to acknowledge their inner voice because doing so requires admitting what they really want, and that desire often contradicts the identity they've built. Women watching them frequently notice this conflict before men do. They see the hesitation behind his choices, the way he lights up when something aligns with who he truly is, and the way he shuts down when something doesn't. They can feel the truth he already carries but hasn't yet allowed himself to articulate. The surprising part is that men often reveal pieces of their purpose without even realizing it. They do it in the causes they defend without hesitation, the frustrations they can't ignore, the moments where they lose track of time because something felt so natural. Women can often trace these patterns instantly. They hear it in his tone, see it in his body language, and feel it in the way he talks about certain topics with a different kind of energy. But men tend to discount these clues because they seem too simple, too obvious, too familiar. Forgetting that purpose usually hides in the very things that feel like second nature. The reason men underestimate their inner knowledge is because they've been conditioned to believe that clarity must come from struggle, accomplishment, or some dramatic awakening. Society rarely teaches men to slow down long enough to recognize what has always been true about them. Women, on the other hand, are often more attuned to emotional patterns, which allows them to recognize purpose through feelings as much as logic. Men typically lean on logic to rationalize choices, which makes them overlook the emotional signals that point directly toward their why. When men start acknowledging those signals, they begin to realize that their purpose has been speaking up for years. It just wasn't speaking the language they were taught to listen for. The most powerful shift happens when a man finally accepts that clarity doesn't come from searching harder, but from trusting deeper. He begins to recognize that the things he instinctively gravitates toward are not random interests. They are reflections of his identity. He starts noticing that what motivates him isn't based on age, experience, or milestones, but on values that have been consistent since childhood. Women often see this consistency clearly, noticing how he responds to challenges, how he treats others, and what he protects most fiercely. Those patterns reveal far more about his purpose than any life event ever could. The truth is, men already know who they are long before they feel ready to admit it. The challenge isn't discovering something new. It's having the courage to trust the truth that has always been there. The easiest way to understand a man's purpose is to look at what brought him joy long before responsibility began shaping his identity. As boys, men gravitate toward things that make them feel alive, building, fixing, imagining, protecting, exploring, and in those early moments, their natural strengths reveal themselves without the pressure of performance. But as men grow older, those joys are often dismissed as childish, impractical, or unrealistic, and the world teaches them to prioritize what makes sense over what feels meaningful. Yet those early joys weren't random. They were signals pointing toward the deeper reasons why a man behaves the way he does today. The reason these early moments matter so much is because they reflect a man's raw state of authenticity before expectations stepped in and edited who he was allowed to be. Women observing men often notice how this childhood joys show up again in subtle ways, as hobbies, obsessions, passions, or ways of thinking that never fully went away. A man who once loved building things might now troubleshoot systems or design solutions with the same intensity. A man who loved protecting his siblings might grow into someone who naturally takes responsibility for the people around him. While men often overlook these threads, women can see them clearly because they recognize the consistency in his behavior even when he doesn't. The challenge for many men is that the world conditions them to believe joy is secondary to responsibility. They are taught to prioritize stability, provide for others, and push aside anything that doesn't contribute directly to survival or success. That mindset makes them disconnect from the very parts of themselves that reveal their purpose. Women often sense this disconnection before men do. They can feel when a man is living out of obligation rather than alignment. They see the heaviness in his actions, the tension in his choices, and the way his energy shifts when he slips into something that once brought him joy. That shift is not random, it is a reminder. The deeper truth is that early joys often carry emotional patterns that have never left. A man who loved creating isn't just creative, he finds meaning in bringing something new into the world. A man who loved competing doesn't just seek victory, he thrives in environments where growth and challenge push him forward. A man who loved helping others isn't just kind, he is fueled by contribution and connection. Women often see these emotional drivers faster than men because they pay attention to how joy influences behavior. Men, on the other hand, tend to view joy as a luxury, which causes them to silence the very clues that would help them understand themselves. The most revealing observation is how joy shows up without being asked. Men may hide it, downplay it, or dismiss it, but it always finds a way back through passions they revisit, activities that re-energize them, or conversations where their tone changes without them realizing it. Women often mention these shifts. You seem different when you talk about that, or you come alive around that. They're not making small talk, they're identifying purpose. Men rarely realize that these small sparks of joy are actually echoes from their earliest years, calling them back toward who they've always been. The truth is, the earliest joys were never hobbies, they were hints. And the reason they feel so powerful even now is because they were never meant to be forgotten. Confusion becomes one of the most misunderstood parts of a man's journey because men are raised to believe that uncertainty is a flaw instead of a signal. From a young age, men are taught that strength equals clarity, direction, and certainty. So when confusion shows up, they assume they've done something wrong. But confusion isn't a sign that a man is lost. It's often the first sign that his deeper truth is trying to break through the noise of expectations. It appears not because he lacks direction, but because he's finally questioning the direction he was given. The reason confusion feels so uncomfortable for men is because they've been conditioned to equate identity with control. Men often believe they must know exactly who they are, what they're doing, and where they're going at all times. This pressure comes from culture, family, and even their own internal standards. Women observing them often see the tension this creates. They see a man's shoulders tighten when he talks about his future, the shift in his tone when he feels uncertain, the quiet frustration when he admits he isn't sure. Women interpret that confusion as growth, but men often interpret it as failure, which makes them run from the very signal that's trying to guide them. The most important shift happens when a man realizes that confusion usually shows up right before clarity. Confusion appears when the old way of living no longer fits, but the new way hasn't fully formed. It's the psychological equivalent of outgrowing a shirt, tight, uncomfortable, and undeniably obvious. Women often recognize this moment as a turning point, sensing that he is on the edge of self-discovery, even when he can't see it himself. What feels to him like unraveling looks to her like awakening because she sees the emotional patterns he might be ignoring. The conflict men face is that confusion feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability makes many men instinctively want to hide. Instead of sitting with the discomfort, they rush into action, changing jobs, changing plans, or distracting themselves, hoping movement will erase the uncertainty. Women notice this impulse and often wish men understood that stillness, not speed, is what brings clarity. When a man stops trying to outrun confusion, he starts learning from it. He begins to see the patterns behind his frustration, the values behind his discomfort, and the desires he has been suppressing because they didn't match who he thought he needed to be. The truth is that confusion is not a lack of direction. It's a conflict between the direction a man inherited and the direction he's meant to follow. Every time a man feels confused about his path, it usually means he is outgrowing an old identity. Women often sense this shift because they pay attention to emotional nuance. They can tell when a man's ambition changes, when his values evolve, and when his heart pulls him somewhere unfamiliar. They often encourage him to explore that discomfort, not because they want him to change, but because they know confusion is where self-honesty begins. The most powerful realization comes when a man understands that confusion is not the end of clarity, but the birthplace of it. Confusion shows up when he is closer than he thinks, to understanding who he truly is, what he truly values, and why he has been searching in the first place. The most dangerous lie men tell themselves is that they have unlimited time to figure out their purpose, because believing that lie gives them permission to postpone the very work that would transform their lives. Men often reassure themselves with phrases like, "I'll start later," or "I'm not ready yet," not realizing that waiting doesn't protect them, it costs them. Every year spent delaying self-discovery isn't neutral. It's a year lived in a direction that may not belong to them. And while purpose doesn't expire, the opportunities to live it fully absolutely do. The reason waiting is so costly for men is because men are conditioned to prioritize responsibility over identity. They grow up believing they must build stability first, then clarity, provide first, then reflect. Women watching this often see the silent sacrifice men make. They see the dreams put on hold, the passions buried under obligation, the authentic parts of him slowly traded away in the name of doing the right thing. Men think they're buying time, but what they're really doing is spending their most capable years drifting further from the fulfillment they're actually searching for. The longer a man waits to pursue purpose, the harder it becomes to disentangle his identity from the roles he has taken on. Men often anchor themselves to careers, relationships, or expectations simply because they've invested too much time to imagine anything different. Women can sense the tension this creates. They can feel when a man is no longer growing, only maintaining. They notice when he is existing instead of living, performing instead of becoming. While he tells himself he's being practical, she sees the cost: rigidity, frustration, emotional distance, and an inner dullness that creeps in quietly over the years. The true deadline of purpose is revealed not by age, but by the emotional toll of avoidance. Men pay for postponing purpose with rising resentment, increasing confusion, and a shrinking sense of possibility. Every time a man ignores the internal nudge towards something meaningful, that nudge doesn't disappear. It hardens into dissatisfaction. Women often notice this shift before men do, sensing that he is struggling with a silent question he hasn't allowed himself to answer. The cost isn't just lost time, it's a gradual erosion of self. The most painful part of waiting is that it trains a man to live reactively instead of intentionally. The more he delays pursuing purpose, the more life begins making choices for him. Jobs chosen out of convenience, relationships out of comfort, habits out of routine. Women observing this often wish men understood how quickly years can slip by when they're not aligned. They see the potential he hasn't tapped, the courage he hasn't accessed, and the dreams he quietly mentions but never commits to. They understand that purpose doesn't demand perfection, it demands participation. The real truth men must face is that every day spent waiting is a day spent drifting from the life they are built for. Purpose has a deadline, not because it disappears, but because the window to live it boldly narrows with every moment a man hesitates to pursue it. The most liberating truth a man can accept is that the only age that matters is the one he is right now. Because purpose doesn't care how old he is. It only cares how honest he's willing to be. Men often assume they need to reach a certain level of maturity, success, or stability before they can begin pursuing their why. But waiting for the right moment becomes the very thing that prevents them from ever experiencing it. The age you are today is not a limitation. It's an invitation to begin before life forces you to. The pressure men feel to have everything figured out by a certain age is not internal, it's inherited. Culture teaches men that their worth is measured by how early they succeed, how fast they advance, and how quickly they establish themselves. Women observing men often notice how much this timeline weighs on them. They see the fear behind his ambition, the self-doubt behind his achievements, and the quiet anxiety that grows every year he feels behind. While a man thinks he's racing against time, she sees him racing against expectations that were never his to begin with. The power of acting now comes from understanding that clarity rarely arrives before commitment. Men often want certainty first, proof, reassurance, guarantees. But purpose only becomes visible once a man takes a step toward it. Women tend to understand this instinctively because they are conditioned to navigate the unknown emotionally, not just logically. They recognize that action reveals truth faster than contemplation ever will. When a man takes even a small step towards something that feels meaningful, she often sees the shift immediately. His energy rises, his tone changes, and something dormant wakes up inside him. The reason today matters so much is because waiting unconsciously trains a man to believe that his purpose is always in the future, never in the present. This mindset keeps him chasing, reaching, hoping, always close but never arriving. Women often sense when a man is stuck in this pattern. They can tell when he's living for one day instead of right now, when he's full of potential but afraid to begin. They aren't impatient with him. They simply recognize that purpose requires momentum, and momentum cannot start tomorrow. The shift happens when a man finally realizes that age is not a barrier to purpose, but a lens through which purpose expresses itself. A man in his 20s brings hunger and curiosity. A man in his 40s brings wisdom and perspective. A man in his 60s brings clarity and intention. Women often appreciate this more than men do. They see how every stage of a man's life contains something valuable, something powerful, something necessary for his purpose to unfold. They don't judge the stage he's in. They care about his willingness to start. The most important reason to act now is that purpose grows only through experience, not theory. Men often overthink their path, trying to mentally solve a journey that can only be understood by walking it. Women observing them often encourage action, not because they're pushing, but because they believe in what he is capable of becoming. They see the man he could be if he stopped postponing who he already is at his core. The truth is that the life a man wants will not wait for him to feel ready. And the moment he decides that today is enough, that who he is right now is enough, is the moment his purpose finally has room to begin.